For decades, the promise of the American retirement was simple and sacred. You worked hard for 40 years, you paid into the system, and when you crossed the finish line, you could rest. We were told that a mix of personal savings and Social Security would safely carry us through our golden years. But today, right in front of us, that promise is shattering.
Retirement in the United States is starting to look very different from what people expected. According to recent data from the Federal Reserve, only about 35% of non-retirees believe their savings are actually on track. That number has not meaningfully recovered since the pandemic. At the same time, confidence is slipping. Surveys in 2026 show just over 60% of workers think they will have enough to retire comfortably. Those numbers are not extreme, but they are not reassuring either. For decades, the assumption was simple. You worked, you saved a little, and systems like Social Security Administration would fill in the gaps. That expectation is now under pressure. Current projections show that by the early 2030s, benefits may be reduced if no policy changes are made. At the same time, the cost side is moving in the opposite direction. Healthcare, housing, and basic living expenses have all risen faster than many retirement plans were designed to handle. A report from Fidelity Investments estimates that an average 65-year-old may need over $170,000 just for healthcare in retirement. So the situation is not defined by one problem. It is a combination of smaller pressures that add up. And once you start looking closely, the gap between what people expect and what the system actually delivers becomes difficult to ignore. Aggregate data can describe trends, but it often hides how those trends show up in daily life. For many retirees, the issue is not a single financial failure. It is the accumulation of ordinary expenses that no longer fit within a fixed income. Consider a typical scenario: someone who worked most of their life in a wage-based job without a formal pension. Their primary income in retirement comes from Social Security Administration, sometimes supplemented by a small personal saving account or a modest retirement plan. That income often lands somewhere between $1,500 and $2,500 per month. On paper, it may appear manageable. In practice, the breakdown tells a different story. Housing costs take the first share. Even for those who have paid off a mortgage property, taxes, maintenance, and insurance remain. Renters face even more pressure, especially in areas where housing costs have increased faster than income. Utilities follow: electricity, water heating, and communication services. None of these are optional. Food costs have also risen. Data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that essential categories like groceries have seen sustained increases over recent years. For retirees, these are recurring expenses that cannot easily be reduced beyond a certain point. Healthcare adds another layer. Even with Medicare coverage, out-of-pocket costs remain. Premiums, co-payments, prescriptions, and specialist visits all contribute. These are not predictable from month to month. When these categories are combined, the remaining margin becomes very limited. That is where behavior starts to adjust. Appointments get postponed, not canceled outright, but delayed until finances allow. Preventive care becomes less consistent. Non-essential purchases disappear almost entirely. Even small discretionary spending is reconsidered. Savings are expected to provide flexibility in these situations. But for many households, that buffer is minimal. According to the Federal Reserve, median retirement savings remain below $100,000. Spread over a retirement that may last 20 or 30 years, this does not translate into meaningful monthly support. It becomes a reserve rather than an income stream. And reserves are used cautiously. People do not draw from them unless necessary, because they are aware that once used, they are not easily replaced. This creates a situation where individuals may have some savings on paper, but still behave as if they do not. The result is a version of retirement that looks stable from a distance, but operates under constant constraint. Not collapsing, but not comfortable either. The current situation is often described as a failure to save. That explanation is incomplete. To understand what changed, it helps to look at how retirement used to work. For much of the past century, a large share of workers relied on defined benefit pensions. These plans were managed by employers. The responsibility for funding and maintaining retirement income did not fall on individuals in the same way it does today. If someone stayed with a company long enough, the outcome was relatively predictable. There was less dependence on market performance and less need for active financial management. That structure has largely been replaced. Today, retirement planning is centered around defined contribution systems such as 401k plans. These accounts depend on individual contributions, investment choices, and long-term market performance. The responsibility has shifted from institutions to individuals. That shift introduced flexibility, but it also introduced complexity. Managing a retirement account now requires decisions about contribution rates, asset allocation, risk tolerance, and withdrawal timing. These are not simple choices, and they have long-term consequences. Access is another issue. A significant portion of the workforce does not have consistent access to employer-sponsored retirement plans. This is more common among small businesses, part-time workers, and lower-income jobs. Without automatic enrollment, participation depends on individual initiative. Data from Vanguard shows that participation rates improve when enrollment is automatic. When it is not, many eligible workers delay or opt out entirely. Even among those who do participate, outcomes are uneven. Average account balances have increased over time, but averages do not reflect distribution. A smaller group of higher-income individuals holds a large share of total assets. Median balances remain significantly lower. This difference matters. The system is designed around consistent contributions over long periods. It assumes stable employment, gradual income growth, and uninterrupted participation. That assumption does not match how many people work today. Careers are more fragmented. Job changes are more frequent. Periods of unemployment or reduced income interrupt contributions. Each gap reduces the effectiveness of compounding over time. There is also timing risk. Market downturns can have a larger impact on individuals approaching retirement. Unlike earlier in a career, there is less time to recover from losses. That adds another layer of uncertainty to planning. So the issue is not that the system no longer functions at all. It continues to work for those who can fully engage with it. People with stable income, consistent contributions, and access to financial guidance often see positive outcomes. But the structure itself has become less forgiving. Small interruptions, delayed participation, or limited access can significantly affect long-term results. Over decades, those differences accumulate. What used to be a system designed to absorb variability has become one that reflects it. At this stage, the explanation often shifts toward individual behavior. People are told they need to budget better, start earlier, or contribute more consistently. Those ideas are not wrong, but they do not fully explain what is happening. The core issue is that saving competes with immediate financial pressure, and in many cases, that pressure has increased. Start with income relative to expenses. Over time, major cost categories such as housing, healthcare, and education have grown faster than wages for a large portion of the population. This does not mean income has not increased at all, but the share of income required for essentials has become larger. That reduces flexibility. When a paycheck comes in, it is already allocated. Rent or mortgage payments are fixed. Utilities are recurring. Transportation is necessary for work. Insurance premiums are ongoing. What remains after these categories is often limited. Saving is expected to come from that remainder. Debt adds another constraint. Younger workers in particular are entering the workforce with student loan obligations. Monthly payments reduce disposable income during the early years, when saving would be most effective due to compounding. Even as income grows, other financial responsibilities tend to grow with it. The structure of employment also plays a role. More workers are part of flexible or non-traditional arrangements. Contract work, gig-based income, and frequent job transitions are more common. These arrangements often do not include retirement benefits, and they rarely include automatic contributions. Without automation, saving becomes an active decision that has to be repeated consistently. In practice, consistency is difficult. This is where the discussion often turns to behavior, but the pattern is more structural than psychological. People prioritize immediate obligations because those obligations are non-negotiable. Delaying rent or insurance payments has direct consequences. Delaying retirement contributions does not. So contributions are often postponed. Even when individuals begin to build savings, those savings are not always preserved. Data from Vanguard indicates that hardship withdrawals from retirement accounts have increased in recent years. This reflects a need to access funds during periods of financial stress. These withdrawals interrupt long-term growth. Compounding depends on time and continuity. When funds are removed, both are affected. Rebuilding takes longer and the final balance is reduced. Over time, this creates a pattern where saving does occur, but not in a sustained way. Short periods of contribution are followed by interruptions. Gains are partially reversed. Progress is uneven. From a distance, it can look like a lack of discipline. Up close, it looks more like a system where short-term stability consistently overrides long-term planning. That is why saving can feel difficult, even when the need is clear. Even in cases where people manage to save consistently, there is another layer that often goes underestimated. Not because the information is unavailable, but because the timing of these costs is uncertain. Healthcare is one of the most significant examples. According to estimates from Fidelity Investments, an average individual retiring at age 65 today may need around $172,000 to cover healthcare expenses over the course of retirement. That estimate includes premiums, co-payments, and other out-of-pocket costs. It does not fully account for long-term care. That distinction matters. Long-term care is not required for every retiree, but the probability increases with age. When it is needed, the cost can be substantial. Data from Genworth Financial shows that nursing care can exceed $100,000 per year, depending on the level of assistance and location. These are not costs that can be easily absorbed through monthly income. They are large, irregular expenses that can significantly alter a financial plan. A retirement strategy may appear sustainable under normal conditions. Regular withdrawals, predictable spending, gradual depletion of savings. But one major health event changes that trajectory. Funds that were intended to last decades can be reduced in a much shorter period. Not because the original plan was unrealistic, but because it did not fully incorporate low-probability, high-impact events. Longevity introduces a related challenge. Life expectancy has increased over time, which extends the period that savings must support. This creates a tension between planning conservatively and maintaining a reasonable standard of living. If withdrawals are too high early on, funds may not last. If they are too low, individuals may underutilize resources during years when they are most active. There is no precise solution, only trade-offs. Inflation adds a third layer. Even when inflation is moderate, its cumulative effect over a long retirement period is significant. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, categories such as food, housing, and medical care have experienced sustained increases. For retirees on fixed income, adjustments are limited. Income sources like Social Security may adjust periodically, but not always in alignment with actual expenses faced by individuals. Private retirement withdrawals can be increased, but that accelerates depletion of savings. So the pressure builds gradually, not through a single large change, but through continuous small increases across multiple categories. What makes these costs difficult is not just their size, but their interaction. A longer lifespan increases exposure to healthcare costs. Healthcare costs tend to rise faster than general inflation. Inflation reduces purchasing power over time. Fixed income limits flexibility in responding to all three. When combined, these factors can shift a retirement plan from stable to constrained without a clear point of failure. That is why some households appear financially prepared at the start of retirement but encounter difficulty later. The plan did not fail in one place. It was gradually overtaken by variables that are difficult to predict and harder to control. Up to this point, most of the pressure has been visible at the individual level, income savings and expenses. But there is also pressure building within the system that supports retirement itself. The most important component is Social Security Administration. For a large portion of retirees, Social Security is not a secondary source of income. It is the primary one. In many cases, it represents more than half of total monthly income. For some households, it represents nearly all of it. That level of dependence makes its long-term stability critical. Current projections indicate that the main retirement trust fund may face a shortfall in the early 2030s. If no policy adjustments are made, benefits would not disappear, but they could be reduced to roughly 77% of scheduled payouts. This creates a different type of problem. It is not immediate. It is anticipatory. People planning for retirement today have to make assumptions about what those benefits will look like 10 or 20 years from now. That uncertainty affects decisions in the present. How much to save? When to retire? How much risk to take? Even small changes in expected benefits can alter those calculations. The effects extend beyond individuals. When retirement income is insufficient, support often shifts to family members. Adult children may contribute financially or provide direct care. This is not a new dynamic, but it becomes more common when formal systems are strained. That support has trade-offs. Money that might have gone into long-term savings for the next generation is redirected. Time that could be used for career development or income growth is reduced. Over time, this affects the financial trajectory of multiple households. It creates a pattern where pressure does not disappear. It moves. At a broader level, public systems are also affected. Programs such as Medicaid and housing assistance play a larger role when retirees face financial constraints. These systems are designed to provide support, but they operate with limited resources and increasing demand. As more individuals rely on them, the strain becomes more visible. So the issue expands beyond personal finance. It becomes a structural question about how retirement is supported across the economy. Not just how individuals prepare, but how systems respond when preparation is not sufficient. And at this stage, that balance is still shifting. At this point, the discussion often turns into a binary question. Is there a retirement crisis in the United States, or is the system still functioning as intended? The answer depends on how the data is interpreted. On one side, there is clear evidence of strain. Savings levels remain uneven. A significant portion of households approach retirement with limited financial buffers. Cost pressures from healthcare, housing, and daily expenses continue to rise. Future uncertainty around systems like Social Security Administration adds another layer of risk. From this perspective, the concern is not hypothetical. It is already visible. On the other side, there is data that suggests stability. Many current retirees report that they are able to maintain their standard of living. Income levels, when measured across the entire population, have increased over time. Surveys continue to show that a majority of retirees feel financially secure, at least relative to their expectations. These two views are not necessarily contradictory. They reflect different parts of the same system. Aggregate data tends to capture overall growth. Median and distribution-based data highlight variation. When averages increase, it does not mean that all groups benefit equally. In the context of retirement, that difference is important. A smaller segment of higher-income households holds a disproportionate share of retirement assets. Their outcomes can raise overall averages even if a large portion of the population experiences limited improvement. So the system can appear strong when viewed from a top-level perspective, while still leaving gaps at the individual level. That is where the tension comes from. It is not that the system has failed completely. It is that its outcomes have become less consistent. For individuals with stable careers, access to retirement plans, and the ability to avoid major financial disruptions, the structure can still work effectively. Over time, consistent contributions and market growth can produce sufficient retirement income. For others, the path is less predictable. Interruptions in employment, limited access to savings plans, and exposure to unexpected costs all reduce the likelihood of reaching similar outcomes. These factors are not evenly distributed, which leads to uneven results. So the question is not whether retirement is possible. It is how many people can realistically achieve it under current conditions. Estimates vary, but a substantial share of the population remains financially vulnerable as they approach retirement, not because of a single decision or mistake, but because of a combination of structural and economic factors that accumulate over time. That makes the issue more complex than a simple label. It is not purely a crisis, but it is also not fully stable. Retirement in the United States has not disappeared, but it no longer works the way many people expect. The responsibility has shifted toward individuals, while the conditions around them have become more difficult to manage. Costs are less predictable, savings are uneven, and long-term support systems are facing increasing pressure. That combination changes how retirement needs to be approached. It is no longer something that happens automatically after a certain number of working years. It depends more on consistency, timing, and the ability to adapt to unexpected changes along the way. For some households, that is manageable. For others, the margin remains thin and small disruptions can have lasting effects. This is not just about how much people save. It is about whether the current structure matches the realities of how people earn, spend, and plan over time. And right now, that alignment is not always there. So the question going forward is not only whether retirement is possible, it is how many people can realistically reach it under the conditions that exist today.